Hey everyone, welcome to another video. I'm Jack, otherwise known as the Avid Assistant, and in this one I wanted to talk a bit about remote working, different methodologies for working from home, for editing in film and television, including my personal favourite method, which involves a NAS box, and these guys for remote collaboration. They're really amazing. I'll tell you about that later. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let's dial it back, get a little bit of context to see where this whole remote working thing really kicked off. So while remote edits and remote reviews have actually been a thing for some time, for example on the Starz series Outlander, that's a show that was shot in Scotland, the edit began here, and there was reviews sent to the States, they would review, maybe give some notes, and eventually the edit would be turned over stateside to be completed. So the concept and the setup has always sort of been there, but for most of our industry's history, we have been in an edit suite, in a post facility, or in a space in person set up for editing, working with an editor, an assistant, and a director. Or maybe more people, but that's sort of your basic building blocks of who you would need there. I'd wager that for most editors, for the bulk of their career, this is what their experience has been like, including myself. But then in 2020, there was a little known event that had some impact on this. Yeah, practically overnight, every worker in every industry had to find a way to work remotely. And when I say overnight, for some companies that was literally overnight. That wasn't necessarily a transition phase. And while for plenty of professions this wasn't necessarily an issue, you know, if you did your job over the phone, or if it was office work or accountancy or data entry, a lot of different work you could do remotely. This wasn't really an issue. It didn't require a lot of hurdles to overcome, but editing of film and TV is not one of those things. Like a number of other professions, we had some issues to overcome. And while I don't doubt that you guys could think of more categories that I'm leaving out here, I'm going to break it down into three major ones. And the first one being file size. So as editors, we work with a whole bunch of footage, say it's a feature film or a TV series. All of that media can rack up into the terabytes. You know, do you stream that data over the internet, somehow requiring a very good internet connection? Do you remote control a machine elsewhere? Do you send drives, all the way to wherever the editor lives? There are pros and cons to each of those different methodologies, and this is definitely one of the things that they had to think about. Which leads me into the second hurdle, collaboration. Now, editors don't work alone a lot of the time. You know, we'll work with assistants, maybe more than one assistant. You know, you'll be collaborating with the director, producers. A lot of the times they would come in for screenings. You'd all sit together. In fact, working with a director when I'm editing and having them sitting next to me side by side, and those conversations that you have in the edit room is one of my favorite parts of the job. You know, the amount of ideas that you bounce off of each other, and even things like if it's a director that you trust and you really like, and they'll suggest things and you're just like, I can't see that working at all. But of course you try it out and then you're like, oh wow, that's brilliant, and that really helps. And a lot of those conversations and those ideas and those little spark moments don't necessarily happen at least the same way when you're just sending cuts and getting notes emailed back to you. Or if you're using a online review platform like Frame.io, which I do find to be excellent, by the way. The first time I used that was actually before the pandemic, and it was on the film Guns Akimbo, where we used that a lot for our VFX reviews. It has a lot of really, really great tools, and particularly for, you know, end network and producer notes where they're not necessarily in the same city or in the same place, and they're not necessarily going to come in anyway. I would definitely prefer Frame.io over email, but it's still not a perfect system. So figuring out a way for the editor to collaborate with everyone else that they need to collaborate with while working at home was hurdle number 2. And then hurdle number 3, of course, is security. Now, the amount of NDAs I have signed since I started my career is a lot. It would be a big stack of paper if you'd add them all up, especially for some larger jobs where you end up signing multiple different NDAs where they break it down into every category of thing that you could do to break confidence. And, you know, this becomes a much harder thing to ensure if the editor is at home and has full access to the media. You know, I've heard some people say that this is a wonder that it didn't lead to like an increase in leaks and pirated copies online. Now that the editors had access to everything at home. You know, NDAs are all great and they provide a good amount of responsibility and repercussions if things happen, but at the end of the day, just like when you invite people into a post facility, there's a certain amount of trust that has to happen. But when working remotely, there's a lot more trust that has to be going on. Because if you're in a post facility, there will be certain security tags. Maybe you'll have a key code to get into the building that only you can use, or a swipe card. You'll have specific logins that only you can use for that particular machine. You'll only be given access to certain parts of the building. It is a more secure environment. Whereas, of course, if the editor is working from home, or the assistant editor, or whomever else has to have access to the material, that required an extra think as to how to approach the security of that, since they now had all of the media at their disposal in their own home. So those were the major hurdles and considerations that they had to take into account at the beginning of the pandemic as we first moved into remote working. But it's now 4 years later, and even although the pandemic is now, for the most part, over, the industry hasn't necessarily all went back to working in person. A lot of editors or even producers and different people have found that they really liked remote working, and it's more or less here to stay. So let's take a look at some of the different methodologies that have been utilized for remote working and for solving some of those different hurdles. And for each of these different methodologies of remote working that we're about to discuss, I'm going to give each of them a score out of 15 in terms of how they best solved those hurdles that had to be overcome in terms of remote working. So a score out of 5 for file size, collaboration, and security, added up to a total score out of 15. So method number 1 to get us kicking off is using local drives. So this is probably going to be the simplest method. You would load all of the Avid media onto a drive, and you would courier that out to the editor, or have a runner deliver it to them. And now they have all the media. They can just plug it into the computer at home. You get them an Avid license, and they can work away. Now, this is a method I've used a few times. I've worked on some commercials using this. I've cut a few short films using this. And for me personally, I'm quite happy with this version, but there are some limitations. For example, this will depend on your editor having available gear. They not all editors even have a computer. That might be surprising for some people to hear, but I know several editors who don't own a computer or even a device capable of running an NLE at home, which pretty much makes this method a non-starter for those people. Now, even if they did have all the gear, it does create an issue with project sharing. So if you have an assistant also working on the same project with the editor, then they have to have all the same media at each end. And so if the editor imports a sound effect onto the, and uses it in the timeline, and then they want their assistant to do exports of that at their end, that can be a bit of an issue. I remember 2 or 3 years ago working on a commercial as an assistant with an editor, and that I'd worked with many, many times before. And we were using, I think, Google Drive to sync 2 drives at either end. And it sort of worked. Now, if you imported some media, if it was something small like some sound effects or some music, it was fine. We just had to wait a little bit for it to sync round at my end and vice versa. But if they did a pickup shoot day, for example, we wouldn't use that method. We would get, another drive courier to both of us, and we would update the drives at our end and make sure we both had the same media. But this does require a good bit of coordination to make sure that you both have the same media there at either end. And now another issue with this one, which will wildly vary depending on the end user, is that you'll have to be your own tech support, essentially. Now, a lot of editors that I know are range wildly in terms of their, comfort with technology and their level of familiarity with modern technology and systems. And so they'll know Avid, the software, and they'll know how to cut. But any sort of issues or crashes or working their way through technical issues like that may be a challenge for some, especially editors who started cutting on a Moviola or something like that, and then transition slowly to Avid. They'll know how to cut, but maybe tech isn't their thing. And if you're in a post facility, this isn't a problem. There will be people there to provide support. But if this has to be done over the phone and it's on your machine, which isn't owned by the post facility, so they don't quite know how you've got it configured, this can be a bit more of an issue. But it's not all doom and gloom. There are some pros to this method as well. Reliability is a lot better than remote controlling a machine. As long as you have some form of internet for receiving emails and doing basic reviews, you're fine. You don't need super high-speed fiber broadband to have a stable connection to remote control a machine or have a stream of video for editing. You're working with it locally, which for me is always a preference. And you can set up the space exactly how you like it in terms of, multiple monitors and your Avid going out to a third monitor. Obviously this depends on availability and what tech that you have or don't have or how much you're willing to invest in your own system. But you have the option to customize the edit space and the software and the layout to exactly how you like it because it's running on your system. But that's enough about individual pros and cons. How would it solve those hurdles that we mentioned before? So for file size, I'm going to give this one a 4. Now, it almost scored a perfect 5, because file size, we've got all of the files here that can send us however big or small a drive that they want. So in terms of getting the drives to us, it's not really an issue. However, for syncing all of those files between different people working and updating them if they do a pickup day and getting us more footage, that's something that's not quite as ideal in terms of we'll have to wait for a drive to be shipped to us. So it gets a good score, 4 out of 5, but just not a perfect one. Then we've got collaboration, which I think is where this one breaks down a little bit. We're isolated to local drives. You have to find different ways like Google Drive or different sync platforms like Dropbox maybe to keep your media at either end in sync. You won't have bin locking or anything else like that. And you'll have to pick out a favorite online review site like Frame.io in order to do your reviews in collaboration with that aspect. So I'm going to give that part a 2 out of 5 for collaboration. And then for security, you just have all of the media locally access to you, not entirely secure. I can just file export a clean version and then upload it somewhere and give it to someone. So I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 15. Now, the next methodology is similar but not the same. It's sort of an evolution of that first method there. And instead of just sending out a local drive, like a standard hard drive, it will be a custom configured NAS. This is probably more of a mature version of remote working that I've seen evolved more recently. I worked on a job just very recently this year on a sort of 2-part drama series with the BBC, and the rest of the crew are based down in London. I'm up here in Scotland, and I was mailed this NAS box from a company called Hireworks. The assistant editor was in London. I was VFX editing on this one, by the way. And each of our NAS boxes synced together like a Nexus. We were able to use a single Avid project and have locked bins and everything. It was emulating a Nexus better than an edit share I've ever seen. It was as close to a Nexus that wasn't a Nexus that I've ever seen. It worked flawlessly. Now, I do have pretty good internet, and I imagine that was a factor. And when I say as close to a Nexus as possible without being one, I will admit that it wasn't quite as good as a Nexus in the sense that when, say, the editor had updated the cut and, he had now passed it to myself and the assistant, we had to wait for a little bit for the NAS system to sync and delete the old bin, replace it with the new bin and cancel the lock. Whereas in a Nexus, that'll be pretty much instantaneous. But other than that little thing, it worked extremely well. I mean, I was importing new VFX shots. The editor was ingesting, music and new shoot days, pickup days that we had done, and all kinds of media. And these NAS boxes between myself and the editor and the Nexus in London that the assistant was at in the post house were all syncing together the entire time beautifully. And even when we shut down our computers at home, the NAS box continued to sync. So if there was a shoot day and it was ingested in the evening and the assistant did all the ingest and sync and prep and laid it all out, then by the morning when we came to work, it was just all there locally for us to use. So you get all the performance of a local drive, but you also get all of the collaboration as if you were in person working together, in a post facility using the same Nexus. It was great. So obviously a lot of the pros and cons of this one are going to be similar to the last, just with a slight improvement. Again, it sort of depends on you having your own gear. having your own machine that can run Avid. But there's some additional cons in the sense that this is an expensive option. You've got to get your production to pay for it. Although if you're on something decent, they can usually afford something like this. It's still cheaper than a edit suite, I imagine, to hire. But you'll also have to have fairly decent internet. I have about a 1 gigabits per second fiber at my home. So I'm imagining this would depend on decent internet for the sync to happen as quickly as it did for us. But of course, then there's the pros. So the same as the last method, this is reliable. You're going to get fast exports. It's very responsive because you're running it locally. You're getting the collaboration and bin locking and everything, just like as if you were in the building on a Nexus. It was fantastic. And I will say that using a local NAS like this as part of your setup for remote working is probably, it's a component of my favorite way of working, which we'll get into a little bit later. But in terms of media storage, that would be my ideal way of doing it. If we're collaborating with multiple people in post, that is the best methodology that I've seen and used. And I was very, very impressed with it. But in terms of how it overcame our hurdles and our final score, so this is our first one that gets a 5 out of 5 for file size. Top notch there. We've got all the media locally. For collaboration, this is a significant improvement over our last method, so I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. It still doesn't get a perfect 5, just because on its own, it's still not getting us anything close to collaborating with a director there in the room and having those conversations while we work. However, for security, it is still more or less the same as the first method in terms of that you have all of the media locally to you. So I'm going to give that one a 0. And I know I keep mentioning the security thing, but it's mostly a note from studio execs. This is something that at the end of the day, there's just going to have to be a certain amount of trust given to the post team, because any which way you slice it, the editor could probably export something out and leak it somewhere if they really wanted to, even if you were in a post facility. It's not something that I'm particularly worried about with the first two methods. It's just something I have to mention. Now, method number 3 will probably be the one that most editors are most familiar with, and that will be remote controlling an edit in a facility. So the edit machine that's actually running Avid Media Composer and the media will be in a post facility somewhere, could be anywhere, and you're remote controlling it from your home computer using a system like Teradici or Parsec. This is the most common methodology for a few reasons. The post facilities have all of the Avids, they have all the Avid licenses, they have hardware to run them all. And this way you're also going to be getting post-facility support. It has a lot of the kinks already worked out with it, because a lot of the technical back end is going to be done at the post-facility side. The only sort of thing to bear in mind with this one is that you are going to need a solid internet connection. I don't care what people say, you need a good internet connection if you're going to be remote controlling an Avid. I rely on keyboard shortcuts and macro scripts and things like that when I'm working. I like to work very fast, particularly if I have an idea to trim and edit and to rebuild something, and I want to be able to do that as quick as possible. And so you're going to want responsiveness with hitting your keys and seeing the desired effect at the other end. And also with playback as well. You don't want any kind of stutter or lag when you're playing back your edit. And that's the only kind of hiccup. Your experience with this is going to depend on how good your internet connection is. So, the higher the fiber service you're able to subscribe to, the better. But how does it score? So file size, obviously this one's a 5, because just like how we would always classically work, all of our media is going to be handled in-house at the post facility. You'll probably be running off of their own Nexis system. So file size and media isn't really something you have to worry about at all. And then for collaboration, this is probably going to be the same as the previous one, because we've got bin locking, we've got project sharing in between our editor and our assistants. They can work together quite well. It's just really the Frame.io online review aspect that you have to work for. I know I keep mentioning Frame.io, and there are other platforms for online review. That's just kind of the one I go to the most. And this is going to be the first one that gets a higher score for security. Now, it's kind of hard to really judge this, but I'm actually going to give this one, say, a 3 for security, because you don't have any of the media physically locally to you. All of the media is offsite at the post facility in a secure environment. And when you go file export, you're exporting to the Nexus. You're exporting to somewhere within the network of the post facility, somewhere locally to them, and they can have their own security settings. They can have their own firewall set up of what you can and can't access. Now, of course, you could, with the Avid that you're remoting into, it must have internet access for you to remote into it, so you could upload that file you've exported somewhere, potentially. But there are more hoops to jump through this time if you wanted to leak something, potentially. So this one gets a 3 out of 5, giving it a grand total score of 12 out of 15, our highest scoring method yet. Now, of course, there are other methods I could talk about, including Avid's own in-house ones like Avid Edit on Demand and, MC Enterprise having the remote proxy features, but I can't really talk about or comment on those since I haven't used those methods. I can recommend you check them out by all means, but while I will say that, Avid's method of, for example, Nexis Edge, which, is basically like a cloud-based Nexus, sounds amazing, it seems to require having an MC Enterprise license. So anyone who has tried out the Nexis Edge or Avid Edit on Demand or any of those features, please do comment on the video and let me know what that experience was like. And then maybe you can give me your rating of how those methodologies solved our hurdles and how the experience was for you. I'd really love to hear about it because I'd be keen to get my hands on that and have a play with it. But something you may have noticed in the methods that I've talked about thus far is that while they do address the file size issue in terms of how to deal with all of your files, and they have different ways of addressing collaboration with editorial working with other people, and maybe even security. They don't entirely address the issue of working together with a director or online reviews with producers and screenings and live edits and that kind of thing. I've mentioned FrameIO a few times and online review sites and exporting time-coded exports, but this is where the second part of my favorite methodology comes in, which is using a brilliant service called LouperIO. Now, Looper is an incredible platform made by a bunch of different engineers. Some of them used to work at Avid, and the service allows us to stream our Avid playout securely over the net, or play out from any NLE really, whilst simultaneously hosting a video call at the same time. So you will get a large window of your Avid out, you'll be sending your sound from your Avid, and then along the left of the user interface, you'll see everybody on the call, you'll get their video and audio feed. And just like how the synced NAS box for me solved all of the in-person editor working hurdles and issues, Looper for me solves all of the hurdles in terms of online video review. I'm talking about file sizes. You don't have to send files or wait for uploads, depending on your internet connection to something like FrameIO. You don't have to send large files back and forth at all because the streaming works really well. And yes, I do have a very good interconnect connection, and that is true. But many of the people that I'm collaborating with and having these live edit sessions with don't necessarily have that. And our calls have generally been flawless. I've had online review sessions with people close to home here in Scotland, like 30, 40 miles away. But I've also had online review sessions and full-on edit sessions working on a project with people in New Zealand and Australia, which is about as far away as you can possibly be from the UK. And it worked brilliantly. And they were on their home Wi-Fi, on their laptop, joining the edit session. Which segues us nicely from file sizes into collaboration because the stream just works so well. Not only do you have the side-by-side, video call that's right there, but an issue that I've seen on other services, for example, something like Evercast, which does something very similar, is audio feedback. So if someone's playing down your edit at their end and they also have their mic on the video call, you get this horrible audio feedback across the call, and no one can hear anyone talk, and it's just terrible. Looper, for the most part, seems to have just solved this problem by default. I haven't ever had that as an issue, even when people aren't using headphones. But in the case that you ever did experience feedback, there is a function there to address that called push to talk. So it's just like a walkie-talkie. You would click and hold down a button when you want to talk, and then you can let it go, and it will mute and unmute your microphone just while you're speaking. And that way, you're not going to get that feedback. And while that would be enough to make me perfectly happy, there are more features to make the collaboration really, really amazing here. If I pause on the frame, we can annotate it, and your annotations and drawings will last for a few seconds and then fade, allowing you to highlight exact points in the frame and better articulate what it is you mean. It's almost like a director pointing at your monitor and touching it, saying this bit and that bit, without you having those annoying fingerprints on your screen that will drive you crazy for the rest of the edit day. You can also have multiple streams within the same room. So a video call will be called a room, and everyone will join the room. But you can have multiple streams. So you could have a stream from your assistant, and you could have a stream from you, and you can toggle between them during the call. Oh, and did I mention how easy this is to set up? From the time that I was first introduced to the software and went on the site and made my account, it was only 5 minutes after that I was live on a session with a director working with them. It is really simple to set up, and they have a whole bunch of different videos on their website to walk you through it as well, catering to different systems and Mac versus Windows as well. Now, as far as security is concerned, each of your rooms can be passphrase protected. No data is kept by a looper at all. Once your session ends, your session has ended. No data, no recordings of the session are kept at looper's end. Users at their end could potentially set up their own screen recording if that was something that you really needed, but it's not part of the looper service. You can set different access for specific loopers. You could create different rooms and have different access for different users that you've invited to your project. And I believe upper levels of the account, I think there's 4 tiers of the account, will allow you to watermark the stream as well. So they have given a lot of thought to security. Enough that I've managed to convince some VFX producers to start using this for their online VFX reviews and edit review sessions on their projects because it just works so well. Previously, we had a Zoom call going at the same time as an Evercast, or everyone just had a file open locally and we're playing down on QuickTime and we had a Zoom call and we were all talking about it, or we were doing a screen share through Zoom to look at our Avid, which is not ideal. So really for an online edit session, this is ideal. It is the best platform that I've came across for this particular purpose. I can highly recommend it to anybody. Now, for full transparency, of course, there are some cons. There always are. There's always pros and cons. Not many, but there are some. You will require a decent internet connection for this to work. You can actually customize the quality of your stream to a whole bunch of different settings to cater for different internet speeds as well, for both the sender and the receiver. So if you are experiencing slower performance, you can just knock it down 1 notch, and then you'll have a much more stable stream. For me, if I had that remote syncing NAS box coupled with Looper, I am perfectly happy, and I've got the ideal setup. But you don't just have to take my word for it in terms of how good Looper is. Here's some testimonials from the people I did my test calls with, both here in Scotland and down under, and you can see what they had to say. Plus, remember how I mentioned earlier how there's different tiers of your Looper account? Well, there's actually a free one. The first tier, the free tier, will allow you to have a fully functional video call streaming your Avid out for up to 40 minutes. And now you cannot put a password to protect this stream. You can email out the link just a few minutes before you're about to start, and then you can cancel it when you're done, and you can see everybody who joins. And then after your 40 minutes are over and the call ends, everyone can feel free to join the stream again and you can start again. So it's sort of like classic Zoom. If you want to use it to trial Looper and to see if it's going to work for you, then by all means, get yourself set up with a Looper account, see how it works for you. And then if you really like it, if it works for your methodology, go subscribe. But that's enough of the sales pitch to Looper. If you would like to try it, there'll be a link down below. We can go to Looper's website. If you want to hear any more info about it, about how to set it up and a demo of it working and all that jazz, I've got another video that I'll have linked here somewhere where you can go and do that. Or if you'd like some tips on remote working and sending media back and forth between locations and stations and keeping it synced with your Avid, I've got an old video that goes into that as well. Otherwise, guys, I will have to love you and leave you and see you in the next video, which will be coming very, very shortly. Keep an eye out for it. And until then, see ya.